All right, welcome back, mental health enthusiasts, to another episode of Ultimate Potential, a mental health podcast. I'm Tony.
And I'm Craig.
And we're your hosts, and we are here to blind you with science, with mental health science.
That's right.
But today, super excited because we have one of, I don't know, would you say one of the more well-known guests we've ever had on the podcast, for sure.
Where?
Winning
I'm looking around.
winning the popularity contest with evidence rather than just...
That's right, with actual
evidence.
counts.
Yeah, that's right.
Senator Mike McKell is here with us. Welcome.
No, thank you for having me.
So I'm wondering if you could just kind of talk a little bit about, help our listeners understand your personal background, your professional background.
So I just assume you brought me on because I like to race horses on the side.
Right.
I thought this was, when I was looking at my email, I thought this was the preview for the Kentucky Derby.
That's right.
But in the real world, I'm an attorney. I'm also a state lawmaker. I serve in the Utah State Senate. I've served in the legislature for 14 years, but an attorney first. I do a lot of insurance work. I say insurance work. I take money from insurance companies. I actually enjoy doing that. I don't know if I should admit that on a show, but a lot of
on this show.
A lot of injury work, car accidents. So that's what I do. I've got a wife, 4 wonderful kids. I live south of this facility, and I do a lot of things on the side. I like to run marathons and race horses. So there you go. There's the brief introduction.
That's right. Well, we're super excited to have you here. Obviously, it's a mental health podcast, right? And you have maybe the leader, at least I think that we see you that way, of being mental health advocate, and also you have educated yourself about the mental health world, I think. And so for us, we're excited to have you on, and so we've got some questions. We want to learn a little bit about that part. So do you have any, tell us how you got interested in the mental health world?
So, and when I look at the mental health world, there's a lot of things that I've done through the legislature. Obviously, we're here at Telos. This is a great facility, and you help a lot of folks with mental health issues, mental health struggles. Let's say struggles. You serve some of the coolest kids and young adults on the planet.
And because you've met
them. They're great kids. Yeah. So I've worked in that space too, but I've also done a lot of legislation with social media and just the way we interact online, and I worry about that as well. I've got the state of Utah sued on a social media bill that has now become a model in other states. I bring that up. I saw that in one of the lawsuits today, the plaintiffs dropped a lot of claims on a Todd Weiler bill. But when I look at mental health, we have a problem not just in Utah. We've got a problem nationally, and obviously you're helping resolve some of those issues here with congregate care. But it's just a much broader problem that we're facing in society, and it has not gotten better, it continues to get worse. And I think a lot of it is how we treat each other. I think a lot of it is what happens online, and we've had a breakdown in society. So I'm glad you guys are working on it. Yeah. This is the first time I've been on a mental health podcast. This is exciting. This is fun.
Good.
Right?
Well, we officially hate kids using social media.
I love hearing that.
It's a plague.
The data is so consistent and so strong.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have compared it to the tobacco companies, in the 60s and 70s. Like, everyone knows it's hurtful.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to take their phones away from their kids. And none of the lawmakers, not none, but most of the lawmakers don't want to regulate. And the way that our world economy, the biggest players in the world economy now, is all about technology, and so that's where the funding dollars come from. And so we've got a battle on our hands, and we're grateful that you are at the forefront of that, both at the state level and influential on a national level.
Well, I worry, guys. I started off talking about social media. The new data on AI The fact that you could have a relationship with a chat box with a computer with the technology is just frightening, and some of the things that we've already seen, it scares me. I mean, this technology is remarkable, but I think it's got the ability. It's going to have the ability to do a lot of damage on our young folks and on a lot of adults. I mean, you guys see it with adults. I'm an adult that's hooked on my cell phone. I'm constantly following news articles and updates and sports and whatever it may be. And I think horse racing, horse racing for sure. I don't know when this is going to air, but I do know the Kentucky Derby is Saturday. I've got number 18s. If anybody wants to know who's going to win the Kentucky Derby, remember number 18. It's a field of 20, but number 18 is my pick. So
there you go.
Remember that. More power to you in going after AI, going after social media. It's moving so fast, and I think that, I mean, laws are behind the curve, right?
Yeah.
You blink your eyes and AI is now able to do something else. And I see us moving, the pessimistic side of me sees us moving toward a world of disconnected people who believe that artificial connection is going to do it for them. And it just won't.
It won't. And it's scary.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable to me that as far as technology, we're more connected now than ever before, but we're also more disconnected now more than ever before. I mean, it's remarkable how many people don't know who their neighbors are.
Yeah.
Your Rotary clubs seem to be evaporating. Your Kiwanis clubs, your Lion clubs, these organizations where we used to get together and gather as communities, we're losing sight of what is important. And anytime I go to a small community, I see a small community fair where you still hold on to those traditions in a community. I think it's incredibly important. It's cool to see, because we are losing our culture, and we're losing it to technology, and we're paying a price because of it.
Yep.
And I look at the industry that you guys are in, helping fight with kids to improve their mental health. The need is not going away. It's only getting greater and greater, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, speaking of what we do here at Telos, congregate care, doctors take the oath that first do no harm, right?
Right.
And in a perfect world, every helping profession would first do no harm, but that's not always the case. And in congregate care and youth programs, we have seen, some high-profile media coverage on some pretty ugly and scary things that have happened in youth programs, right? I mean, you have a vulnerable young person who's leaves their home, maybe goes states away, maybe even countries away, to the care of strangers, and the hope is that those strangers would see that as a sacred trust and handle with care, but that's not always the case. And you picked up on that. Could you talk a little bit about how you got started in advocating for some reform and improvements in youth programs?
So early on, I actually had a family member. It was a cousin of my wife, and he was an employee in rural Utah in a facility with probably not the resources that they should have had, with staffing ratios that were probably not where they could have been. And he was beat up bad, nearly left him dead. Another employee was beat up really bad, nearly left dead. Both of them sustained traumatic brain injuries. And I started looking into it. I called around to several different law firms that I work with. I'm like, what do we do in this situation? And it's not the general, I mean, there's no hard and fast rule, but it just felt to me like the further you got away from an urban area with a base of good employees, a base of educated folks, the problems seemed to be significant. I remember looking at a facility down near Pingwich and talking to an attorney about some of the things that had happened there. And I was blown away. And I called. I started talking to some of our state regulators, like, what is the regulatory structure? And it was pretty weak in the state of Utah. It was pretty light, to say the least. But it was, seeing it firsthand. Obviously, since then, I've done a lot in regulation. I've been to lots of facilities. There's things that jump out to me at facilities where you can see that there is a real commitment to kids. I mean, if there's two things that that I would say jump out the most to me as a really good indicator of a facility where the programming is appropriate. I think the first thing you've got to look at is the education structure.
Mhm.
And we say congregate care, often that's going to have a school attached to the program in the name. It'll be an academy or a school. And I'll tell you, there are programs up and down the state where the education is based on packets, as
Packets,
if like when we went through COVID, I had a son of mine who probably needed a better parent pushing him, and in the end, when he had to make up some classes, he had to make up those classes through packets. And you'll see facilities that base an entire program around packets rather than teachers and educators in an education type setting. And I think it's really easy to see. I know as I was looking at some of the questions we were going to talk about today, if you want to identify a facility that is better right from the start, I think you look at that. What is the education program
Mhm.
actually like?
Yep.
Is there an expectation that there's going to be an educator, a teacher, somebody certified working with the kids? And I think you see that. And the other thing I've been really surprised by is just the quality of employees. It's very obvious to me that there are facilities that put their resources into finding really good, qualified folks with credentials, and
Mhm.
other facilities just don't. And it's pretty, either you do or you don't, and it's pretty obvious,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, a facility really is not about the four walls and a roof. It's not even as much about the clinical curriculum. It's about the people. It's
Yeah,
about the people that are there,
yeah,
and quality people who are inspiring, who know how to connect with young people and protect them. Right.
Right.
yeah.
I mean, that's really the first bar of
Mhm.
entry. Right.
I remember years ago, um, I did one day a week contract that lasted for 6 months, and the idea was to take what we had developed in this in the private world and
Right.
had this great reputation. Everybody around the country knew who we were, and um, and back before our state, the state of Utah, raised their rates.
Hmm.
The state programs, the kids that were custody of the state and needed this level of care, the there was such a disparity, right, between who they could afford to hire, what services they
Right.
got, or whatever. And so I would drive to rural Utah, 2 hour drive out once a week, spend time, and my only job was to just be creative and think about what we could implement on their budget,
Right.
the type of things that we did on their budget. And and after 6 months, the list was very short because the lack of resources, number
Yeah.
one. But but and it's not, I'm not disparaging any one community. I'm not even naming communities, but the blessing of being here around 65,000 Utah Valley students and another 50,000 BYU students and another
Hmm.
50,000 University of Utah and Westminster and Salt Lake,
Yeah.
like, and so many young people and so many people, like hundreds of thousands of people who all, it's like half their majors are psychology and
Yeah, it's
you know what I
true.
mean, like family science, and everybody wants to do this here, but when you're out in those communities,
Much harder.
it's so hard to find
Yeah.
people. And that was my number one, like on my final report under contract, it was, you know, finding and retaining people who actually not just want to work with kids, but have qualifications, and understanding, like professionalism about how to do it.
Right.
And
Right.
it was really sad for me, honestly. It was probably the only depressing part of my entire career.
Well, it's tough, and I've seen our payment structure as a state in some of those rural communities for some of our state kids,
Yeah,
and it's pretty difficult,
it is
and
difficult.
it's difficult to take somebody from an urban setting and bring them to rural Utah based on what those contracts look like, and it's a struggle.
Yeah.
It's definitely a struggle for the state of Utah having enough funding in that setting.
Yeah.
So, as you've introduced and sponsored a couple of bills now aimed at I don't know if you'd call it reform or if you'd call it improvement or regulation, but aimed at helping protect youth
Yeah.
in these programs. Um, what was your aim there? What does it break down to? Staff ratios? Does it get broken down to students or kids having the ability to talk to somebody? If they're being mistreated.
I think all of that is important, but more importantly than that, just on the front end, let's make sure that we actually have a facility with resources to treat the problem,
Mm-hmm.
and let's identify right away what's the concern with this population, this group of, and I've been to lots of programs, and these kids are great kids, but they all come a little bit different with different concerns.
Mhm.
And one of my concerns right from the start is it always felt to me like there are facilities that if there's a paycheck, we're able to treat this child, and that always concerns me. And what I like to see as a lawmaker, let's make sure on the front end that we've got the tools and resources in place if we've got a child with X diagnosis
Mhm.
or B diagnosis, C diagnosis, that concern that we're trying to work with actually fits the facility and the actual credentials of the facility itself. And I'll tell you, as I've gone out, and I've seen some really, really good programs, but I've also seen programs where I think the criteria has been there's a willing payer
Yes.
rather than a
Exactly.
facility with credentials to actually take care of those kids. And that seems to be the problem. And I think those facilities are easy to spot now, having been around the block a few times. I mean, I start out by what I said before with education. You can see the difference between programs right away in how they invest in the education of the kids.
Mhm.
And it's easy to monetize these kids and pull those resources away from education because it costs a lot of money. But you can see facilities that are kind of doing it right, and those that are skimping around some of the things that are most important.
Yep.
But
It's a best practice that
it is.
exists now that really a big change, mid to late 80s, but in the 60s and in the 50s, you didn't have the research to back what best practice is for the difference between OCD versus major depressive recurrent versus alcohol addiction versus intermittent explosive disorder or reactive attachment disorder. And so there are still, some of our collegial programs who believe that there's one way,
Right.
that this structure of this program can treat all of these really severe different diagnoses, and that frankly is just not good. It's not a good way to go about it.
Well,
So we're with you.
for our listeners who probably won't know this,
Which is a lot of listeners,
yeah,
by the way.
That's right.
we always wonder how many. For our listeners, the last bill sponsored by Senator McKell that passed had something built into it called a Congregate Care Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
And the idea was, let's create a multidisciplinary team, a committee of people from different backgrounds, but all had connection to congregate care and to working with youth. And let's have them meet every month. And the first order of business is I applied and I was put on that committee with some others. The first order of business is we are to identify a standard residential treatment center versus an intensive residential treatment center, which right now that distinction doesn't exist in Utah. And the idea behind that is just what Senator McKell and Craig were talking about, which is you can't just take any student into your program. Great programs have a really clear admissions criteria, and they take students who fit that. And then there's those ethical tests that you have to pass. When census is down and you're losing money, do you say yes to the student that you know is not a good fit just so you can get that paycheck? Well, it's slow work, but we're making progress on this congregate care advisory committee. And the end result is going to be some distinction. So as a program, you're either standard or you're intensive, or maybe you have different parts of your program that can serve either, but you're going to have some different resources and some different safety measures if you're going to be working with these more intensive kids. What that's going to do, it's going to be better for the kids. It's going to be safer for them. It's going to be safer for the staff. The outcomes are going to be better, and it's going to be better for our communities. There's going to be less treatment abandonment. There's going to be less treatment failures that kind of leave a family holding the bag high and dry. So that's the aim, and like I said, it's slow work, but we're making progress on that.
And I love hearing that. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work of that advisory committee. It's one of those things where I serve in the legislature. I've been there probably too long at this point, but I've done 14 years, and eventually we leave. And we want to leave a structure that provides some longevity that'll outlast all of us. And that was really kind of the goal. As I've looked at the issue, we've provided better reporting, we've provided inspections, more employees, but ultimately, when I look at some of my concerns historically, I've had facilities say, well, if we didn't have this law, we could treat all of these kids under all of these conditions from facilities that have had really serious violations. And the reality is I think you just need to recognize the fact that you've got to have the resources for the kids that you bring in, and really be able to take care of those. And I'm always leery when a facility thinks they can treat absolutely everybody, especially when they get further away from our urban centers, where I know just going out there, just like you've been out there, you've seen it, and there's nothing wrong with rural Utah. I love rural Utah. I grew up in rural Utah, but the true reality is the further you get away from the resource base, the more difficult it is. And when I have a program in an extremely remote part of the state telling me that we can take anybody, we can treat every single kid without the type of professionals that you would see at a facility like Telos. You've got access to some of the best professionals in the state. You've got these two big universities that are right here that provide credentials for folks that can provide this type of care. It always makes me a little nervous, and that's part of the reason I was really interested in seeing that kind of change, because that's a change that'll last, that'll keep a different standard for these kids long term, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that the establishment of that advisory committee is really smart, because it will still be there doing its thing, after maybe you've gone on to greener pastures, wherever that may be in
retirement.
So let's say that there's a family out there, and as you know, there's been a lot of the media loves to pick up sensationalized stories, and treatment program does great work and heals a child and saves a family is never going to be a headline. It's never going to sell a newspaper, right? But when something terrible happens, it's immediately picked up. And what that can do is it can create a false perception that all of these places are bad. Any young person who goes to out-of-home treatment is going to be abused or going to be taken advantage of. So say that there's a family that's seen all of this, and they've just been inundated with this negative media. And so their child maybe really does need this type of care because the community resources have failed, but they're terrified. And so they're like, not gonna maybe move in that direction. What would you say to that family?
I think, first of all, if you're looking for a facility, the resources, the type of treatment program needs to match the problem. And I think that goes back to our advisory board. But I also think it's important to visit facilities. And I know I threw this out there, and I'm going to say it again and again. One of the quickest signs of a program that's good and a program that needs some help is the quality of education that they provide to the kids. And it's funny. I've been out and I've visited more than a dozen facilities, and it's one of those consistent themes. Programs that tend to really struggle also provide a really poor. They have a really weak framework when it comes to the education of the congregate care facility, and I think it's one of the quickest, easiest clues that you're at a facility that's got resources. If I'm a parent, I'd probably want to see some resumes and some bios for the actual staff and actual teachers. But if it's just a program where you show up and you're gonna watch videos and do workbooks, I'd as a lawmaker and a parent, I'd be super leery. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that. And the other thing, and I'll throw this out there. This is probably too technical, but I'm always a little leery of when it's you guys are owned by people who are here working with kids every day. Your ownership structure is a little bit different across the valley. You've got kind of a group called Heritage, right? And that's a not-for-profit structure, which I think works better. I will always be leery, and I'll say this on a podcast. I'm always leery if it's private equity owned, because I know when it's private equity owned that the idea is how do we get money to our shareholders and our investors, and a lot of those resources don't get back to kids. And I always cringe when there's a private equity model. I think across the board, I think treatment is always worse. Yeah. And I shouldn't say that's always the case, but generally speaking, I think private equity tends to take some really good value, and sometimes that value that comes in doesn't make it to the end of the row, right? I mean, I'm a farmer. I'll look at it in a form of irrigation. How do I get the water to the end of the field, the end of the row, so to speak? And when you've got too much private equity and there's a lot of hands pulling that water or that money away before it ever gets to the end where these kids are, I'm a little leery. And I'll just I shouldn't say that, but I will. So there you go. And I know your structure here is different, and I know that the owners of Telos, for example, you guys are here every day. You work here every day. You probably have too many owners, which means nobody's
Well, no, we
nobody's
never
doing
agree.
nobody's doing very well because
you guys
there's
are all
too many
doing
of us.
okay, but you're not.
Yeah,
But nobody's
it's true.
nobody's killing it, right? And that's okay. But you're in a facility where, because of that structure, you get to. I mean, it forces you to focus on the kids in the program.
So it sounds like you're saying to a family that really needs this level of care, don't just not do it, but buyer beware. I mean, do your due diligence, visit the program, talk to the people, look at the education, look at the ownership, and then make an informed decision.
Yeah, and it's tough. Like you guys know this. Marketing there's a lot of people that are geniuses when it comes to marketing. I'm amazed how many facilities have photos of rock climbing, horse riding, backcountry skiing, downhill skiing. I mean, you name it, it's there. And we come up with these great names for facilities where that stuff almost doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen because it's expensive, and it pulls some of that revenue away from folks. I think it's got to be, you got to make sure the advertising's real.
Yeah.
And that's tough. It's tough when you're across the country and you're trying to find a facility. But I would say you've got to, the cost is high enough that you've got to be able to go out and I'd do it. I'd do a visit. I'd do a site visit.
That makes me think of this new way that we're hiring people.
Yeah.
We're working with a consultant who's teaching us how to do better hiring. And he basically said, interview them, have them come and interview them, but don't make a decision based on the interview. The interview is almost irrelevant. You're just trying to kind of assess that they're not crazy. What you need to do is you need to ask them for references, but instead of having them give you the 2 or 3 people that they know are going to say something good about them, you say, hey, can we talk to this person and that person at these different places that you've worked, and try to get them to give us permission to do that. Yeah. And then we go and talk to those people. And the best way to judge whether or not somebody's going to be a good employee is their past record of people that they've worked for, right? And I think the same thing is true. There's glossy websites, there's stock photos, there's fancy names, but at the end of the day, if you talk to other
People.
parents and you talk to
Other
students
students.
and you say, what's this place really like? You know, what's your experience? You're going to get a much better
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
I agree. Okay. At the end of every podcast,
Yeah.
we kind of like allow you to do shameless plugs. Now, we've never done this with
Shameless plug.
we've never done this with a politician. So,
Well,
so I know that you're a lawyer
politician,
first.
lawyer.
Attorney, politician.
Wow.
So, anything like charities you're excited about, a book that you're writing, a campaign slogan, a website,
A candidate
a
you're
candidate
endorsing.
you're
Yeah.
endorsing.
I'm not going to give you. I'm not going to give you any of that. I will wrap up by just
Okay.
thanking you guys for having me on. This is what I tell. This is what I tell kids, right? And you guys treat a lot of kids. I get the. In my life, I get to work with a lot of youth, and I think it's totally cool. And the one thing I tell all of them, it doesn't matter what you do in life, whatever you do has to be meaningful to you. So I appreciate you guys having me on. I appreciate the fact that this is meaningful to you guys.
Yeah.
I serve in the legislature because it's meaningful. I take on weird fights that people can't explain, like why is he fighting that issue? I typically fight stuff that's meaningful. This last session, this is not my plug, but I did everything in my power to ban kratom in the state of Utah, and I got close. I mean, it's nearly banned entirely. I got almost a full ban. But the reason I take on issues like kratom, like social media, like congregate care, is because it's meaningful.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the fact that what you're doing is meaningful. I think a lot of our mental health problems right now happen because we've got a lot of kids that are living lives that are not meaningful.
Yeah.
And meaningful life means it's a life where you're finding ways to help your community, serve others. And I think we've lost track of that, and we lost sight of that. And so that's where I'm going to leave. So if there's anybody watching, all 25 of you, hopefully there's more than 25. Just think through the decisions you do in life when it comes to mental health. I am certainly not a mental health expert, but I think if more people found ways to serve and fight for things that give them meaning, it might put you guys out of business. I'm just
right,
but
Yeah.
that would be a good thing.
I think we're a long ways from that. And when I look at the data, our mental health problem in America, and not just America, I've looked at the data in Australia, I've looked at the data in the United
everywhere.
Kingdom, I looked at it in the European Union, I looked at it in Canada. It's everywhere. And I think we've got a societal problem where we're chasing things without meaning, and that needs to change. So there's my plug.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank you for, typically most industries don't want more regulation, right? They want less regulation. And what I've appreciated about you is that, number one, you've been willing to go around to all of these congregate care programs in Utah and actually be there and meet the people and look the kids in the eye. Second, that we've had a seat at the table, like this last bill that was introduced. You did a lot of work with some of my colleagues.
Yeah.
You did work with me, and we got to sit down. In fact, Telos, the leaders at Telos were invited down to your office to sit in your workplace and do a roundtable discussion. You remember that day? So it just feels like we have, as you're helping shape this industry and improve it, we have a seat at the table, we have a voice, and you're known by us. You know us, and we know you. And so I really appreciate that, because that's not always the case.
And I personally, not just that I was raised with horses, but it's like the things that are meaningful to you are meaningful to me as a person.
Yeah.
And so to have built this relationship, and a relationship of trust, but also feel like that we're pulling in the same direction, right? It's an honor to have you here on our podcast, and we appreciate the work you're doing, and also just the extreme, I guess is the correct word, number of hours that you have to give to serve in public office. It's sometimes underappreciated. Everyone, especially if you read anything online, right? You feel like you're hated by 99% of the people because they're the only ones that want to comment, right?
Yep, true.
And so,
Which is why we have a mental health crisis in America.
right? You're willing to put it out there and sacrifice your time, but also, take all the negativity that comes your way. And so we appreciate you for your service to the state. So with that,
that wraps up this episode of Ultimate Potential. And until next time, we always say at the end of our podcast, mental health matters. So we're all going to say it together.
All right.
Until next time, 1, 2, 3. Mental health matters. Thanks for listening. Your mental health journey is so important to us. We'd love your help spreading the word so we can reach as many people as possible. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe here on our social media or wherever you access your podcasts. Thanks.